This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks for that reading, Ivy. In a world where it seems like much of the shine is a bit less shiny, where the 24/7 news cycle erodes our trust and confidence in pretty much everything, including, ironically, the news cycle itself, most of us are in need of some hope. And the good news is, this morning's reading from Isaiah is chock full of hope. From the vantage point hundreds of years before Jesus walked Palestine, Isaiah accurately discerned the currents and contours of the ways of the Lord. And Isaiah foretold the arrival of one so different to all others as to be virtually unbelievable. Yet this one lived a historical reality and proved to be just like the kind of person Isaiah prophesied. He is the reason for the season we anticipate during Advent. And he is full of wisdom, this one. Now, wisdom can look quite different depending on what you build your wisdom on. Wisdom built on a foundation, for example, of political position will look different to wisdom built on a foundation of, for example, economic security. If your wisdom is founded on political position, you might choose to act in certain ways and forego certain benefits for the sake of securing this political advantage or that political position. However, if your foundation is more economic security, your choices would be different again. The primary consideration as you view the world and make your way through it will be, what are the financial security implications of this way or that way? But the one of whom Isaiah spoke, his modus operandi is built upon his reverent respect or fear of the Lord. This shapes all the wisdom of this one. And it also shapes his counsel. If you seek someone's counsel, the frame that one uses to make sense of everything is important. And for this one, the fear of the Lord is the frame that he uses. What are we doing when we seek counsel from someone? It's not the same as seeking advice. We don't really want to hear what someone else might do in our situation because, after all, they're someone else and they're almost invariably not in our situation, because probably we wouldn't ask their advice if they were already stuck like we were. Rather, when we seek counsel, we are seeking a sounding board, someone who will help us know more clearly what our own heart is saying. The one whose counsel we seek cannot help but reflect back to us from who they are. And so they will sound different depending on who they are. If you speak to a room full of people like this, sound sounds differently depending on what the room is made out of. Exactly the same sound being projected out. If the floor was cement covered with carpet, you would be hearing something a little bit different. Same words, but they would sound different. If we had lots of soft furnishings around the walls, again, Ian will tell you this because he knows about sound, but the way sound waves travel and bounce off and then vibrate in the ear, what you're bouncing off actually makes a difference. Exactly the same sound can sound different depending on what it's bouncing off. And there is somewhat of an analogy here for the way that different people will reflect back to us different aspects of who we are depending on the nature of the person whom we are using as our sounding board. So if you seek counsel from the one of whom Isaiah speaks, what you learn of yourself will be shaped by this one's fear of the Lord. That's what will be reflected back to you. And the fear of the Lord is the pathway to knowledge. And you might think, well, how does that work? There's so much information around these days. If you go on YouTube and you want to find out almost anything, or how to do almost anything, you can find a tutorial that will teach you how to play erhu. My daughter's learning the erhu, 2-string Chinese instrument. She looked it up on YouTube. She's learning how to play erhu. Now, we can get overwhelmed with so much information. There's so much data swimming around that we can just actually be deluged by it. One of the tactics of wily and unscrupulous political operators is just to flood the zone with information, outrageous stories and scandals and things like this. And people get so overwhelmed by that brains can no longer meaningfully process the onslaught of data, and it all begins to blur into a confusing melange. Nothing can be appropriately assessed. And the antidote to the onslaught of overwhelming information is to be judicious regarding what you take in. But on what basis would you make that assessment? To what should we pay attention and what should we ignore? Well, the fear of the Lord offers you some guidelines. Pay attention to that which helps you be faithful. Pay attention to that which equips you to serve more helpfully, that which activates your empathy and compassion, that which builds meaningful connections between people or fosters community and love. The fear of the Lord shows us a path to knowledge. All this information, this overwhelming information, can be like a dry desert or an open sea. Too much undifferentiated stuff that we could easily be overwhelmed by or utterly lost in. And the fear of the Lord offers us kind of like a sieve, if you like, through which to mediate the deluge of media. It is the beginning of knowledge. But this one is not like everybody else. The one of whom Isaiah speaks will display a righteousness that is quite simply not natural. It is perfectly natural to judge by what our eyes see and make decisions based on what our ears hear. That's what we do all the time. That's how we make our judgments. Yet this one will not behave in this natural way. This one will behave in a way that is beyond our nature. You might call it supernatural. This one will so delight in the fear of the Lord that all of his judgments will be righteous and appropriately balanced. And I wonder if you have any idea how beyond us it is to be righteous and appropriately balanced. It is beyond us precisely because we cannot help but view things from the very particular perspective of how they impact us personally. But the one who delights in the fear of the Lord is not caught up in that constricted perspective. The one who delights in the fear of the Lord goes to great pains to be liberated from self-centeredness and to pursue all things from the perspective of how God would view the situation. And that's why he has this extraordinary care for the poor in particular. Extraordinary care. It's far more natural for us to disregard the poor. In fact, because poor is sort of a relative category, I mean, you might note that today's poor in our society often have mobile phones and colour TVs. Once upon a time, they were luxury items, but now the poor have them because it's kind of a relative category in that sense. And part of what we do unconsciously is to make every effort to ensure that there is always someone a little bit poorer than us. We like to move up the ladder rather than down. We might offer the poor a little to assuage the guilt that we might feel because we're healthy human beings and we feel connected to the other human beings. But we don't want to swap places with them, do we? We're not willing to become poor so that they might be lifted from their poverty. But this one is. This one judges, and that means governs, the poor with righteousness, not from guilt, not because it's politically correct to appear to care, but with full-hearted regard for the innate humanity of every single person. Where we might be tempted to judge and push people away and make them distant from us, in the sense of assessing others less worthy than ourselves, perhaps, this one offers leadership in extraordinary, beyond natural care. This is the supernatural in a very down-to-earth way. And it's not simply the poor and vulnerable who come in for particular attention that might be regarded as beyond natural. The wicked, those whose efforts create the poor and whose ongoing intent is to ensure the vulnerable never become more secure, those people come in for a bit of stick as well. Of course, few people will acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we were intending to harm anybody else, yet the demands of competition and the constant constraint pressure regarding costs set us up to focus on a smaller and smaller circle of concern in which we are central. And it becomes easy for us to do wicked things even while we tell ourselves we are merely doing that which must be done, as if there's some immutable law that predetermined the actions that were possible for us to take. The one of whom Isaiah speaks is not fooled by such self-deception. The impact of actions are seen clearly. They are weighed accordingly. No one gets away with anything. And our only hope is to own up and then decide to do life differently. And should that happen, something really unnatural will take place. And Isaiah paints a picture that is frankly quite bizarre. The wolf will dwell with the lamb and not eat the lamb, is the unspoken part of that. The leopard will lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little boy will lead them like a mixed herd. Also the cow and the bear will graze, and their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like an ox. The nursing child will play by the hole of a cobra, and the weaned child will put his hand in the viper's den. They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. But that's not how we know nature to be, right? Tennyson is more accurate in his poetry when he reminds his readers with the reference, nature red in tooth and claw. We survive only because of the limits we place around the violence of unrestrained aggression by animals and other people. St. Paul knew this when he wrote to the church in Galatia. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, says Paul, in the statement, you shall love your neighbour as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another. Galatians chapter 5, verses 14 and 15. Because we quickly turn from companions to competitors. That's natural. The environment this one ushers in is not so much against nature as it is beyond nature. It is genuinely supernatural. And in this new environment, this beyond our own nature environment, we live in a way that is beyond our evolved survival of the fittest instincts. This is where we become truly alive. This is where there is a secure place to discover all manner of things that we have no capacity to explore if our primary preoccupation is protecting ourselves from constant threats. The resources we use simply to keep potential threats away are effectively non-fruitful. They are merely about fear management, which is to say they might produce a certain peace of mind for us, but they don't actually produce anything at all. Think about the way the setup of a nuclear deterrent operates. It's a classic example. Nations invest huge amount of resources in these highly technical, super destructive weapons in the express hope of never using them. There's enormous resources tied up in this enterprise that we hope never ever is fruitful. We really hope that it does nothing to anybody. And I'm not suggesting that we should scrap those arrangements in terms of international nuclear deterrence. Maybe they are necessary. But imagine if they weren't necessary. Imagine the resources expended on protection from potential threats that would then be liberated to be used in all sorts of other ways. If the fear were alleviated, those resources that we spend on peace of mind would become creative and fruitful in all sorts of ways. And this could be as personal as relationships with people in your family through to broader national policy settings. I see a classic example of this in a way in our music team, because here we have a music team of various people playing various instruments at various skill levels, various experience. And if they were all caught up with how they were going to be critiqued personally, it wouldn't work very well. If mutual criticism was the kind of culture of the group, everyone would be very cautious about what they had to offer. But because the culture of this team is about worshipping God, and each one brings what they have, and they offer it to one another and to us, as a consequence, resources we never knew we had amongst us have been liberated to the blessing of all. Now, that's a very small example, but you get what I mean. And all of this is going somewhere actually very good. This one who is formed and moved by the fear of the Lord, this one whose wisdom and counsel and knowledge is unlike anybody else's, this one whose supernatural care for the poor and uncompromising attending to the wicked, this one strengthens relationships and alleviates our fears. This one will bring us rest, unlike anything we have ever known before. The rest that this one brings is the rest of well-being. The rest that is possible only after a day well spent. The rest that restores the soul, not merely the body. This is the rest of no longer needing to struggle. All the tasks have been completed, or better still, you've learnt to delight in doing them. Either way, it's no longer a matter of constantly contending with thorns and thistles, those sharp-edged intrusions that take up valuable space and consume resources and are non-productive. This is the rest of satisfaction, the rest of a well-attended garden, the rest enjoyed by a good and faithful servant when the master is well pleased. This is shalom, peace, completeness. Here we are in the 21st century, and developed nations are still invading sovereign territories that belong to other nations. Hyperbolic and extreme political rhetoric is on one side, and mealy-mouthed obfuscation is on the other. In our culture, built on the love of owning material things, we face a time of increasing inflation and rising interest rates. There's confusion of categories of identity and the reactive fear in the face of loss of clarity. And all these things easily dent our sense of hope that there might yet be a way forward for humanity. But there is one. Isaiah saw this one approaching from a long way off. This is one who not only restores our sense of hope, this one reveals to us what the truest humanity living into the image of God, can look like. This one shows us there is yet a way to be that brings life to the world. And during this season of Advent, we anticipate the arrival of the one of whom Isaiah spoke. Maranatha, Orana, come Lord. Amen.